Hello, in this video we're going to look at creating a show in the Show Designer from scratch. So first of all, once you open the Show Designer, you go up and do a File, New, and then that comes up with this dialog that gives you the option to create a new show, and it's asking what type of show you want to create. So as we said in the previous video, there is two types of show, a basic and advanced. We normally recommend you use the advanced because it's got the extra layer of grouping. So select the advanced button there, and then it's asking whether you want a soundtrack to your music. You don't have to have a soundtrack, but if you want a musical light show, then you enter the name of the sound track you want to go to your music in there. So here we've just got the standard Sugar Plum, down to the Sugar Plum Fairies. And when you select that, it then asks you, do you want to change the duration of the show to match the media file? So just say yes, so you get one show that matches the length of the audio. If you select an MP3 file, it will prompt to convert that to a WAV file. It's always best to work with WAV files rather than MP3s, because MP3s are compressed and it's difficult to get the exact timing, so it's always best to work with waves, but the software will automatically convert an MP3 and create a WAV file for you to use. So once you've got that, you've got the soundtrack file. There's a couple of extra fields here about the soundtrack title, artist, and the show description. They're all optional. They're used by the show player to prompt to display a show name rather than just the file name, but for the moment we'll just leave those blank. You see you've got the time here. You can adjust the time if you want, but we've got one so it matches exactly the length of the music. So go ahead and press OK, and then you see it creates a new blank show for you. It creates Christmas tree, a default grouping for you just to start with, but we're going to go through creating our own group, so we're going to go ahead and just delete that one, so we've got no groups in here. So there's a number of ways of actually creating your configuration. There is in the edit tab a quick add, which is by far the easiest just to get you going. You can select how many channels you want to add. If you've got an 8-channel controller and you've just got 8 channels to play with, then you can just select 8, and then it'll prompt you for the name. So you could put controller 1, for example, and then the network, which again we set up in the previous videos. And then it's saying the start ID for the channels. It automatically populates this to the next free device ID based on your configuration. So it's saying device ID 1, starting from channel 1. Each controller has a unique ID on the network. When you purchase a controller, they all default to 1, but you need to change them to be unique on the network. And the channel is basically the output on the controller. So if you just accept the defaults there, and you'll see it's created a group for us called controller 1 with our 8 segments down here, down the bottom. So each one of these is an output on the controller. As we said in the previous video, we don't always recommend you create groups per controller. It's best to think in terms of your actual display. So if you've got a line of trees, if you've got a line of 6 trees, it's best to create a group of those 6 trees rather than splitting it down by controller by controller. But to get you started, by all means, just create a group for your controller to play around with. That's the quickest way of adding. It creates you the channels with just white, assuming you just got white lights. Again, it doesn't matter what you've got configured in the Show Designer when you're playing around, but there is the option to create multiple channels for different colours to make it a bit easier when you're designing your show. So you can say turn on all red lights or turn on all yellow lights, whatever you've got. So the way you do that, you can go into the configuration editor and you'll see that it has just assigned white to all of these different segments. You can go in and change a different colour. So if you've got blue on that channel, you can change that to blue. And if I come out of here, so you can see now that when I go down to the bottom and doing on, I get an option of blue on that channel and white on all the others. If I did it at the top, you see you get a choice of blue and white. But if you turn blue on, obviously only that top channel has got, that top segment's got blue. All the others are white. If I go and turn all colours on, you'll see it turns blue on the top and white on the bottom. So that's how you quickly add channels using that tool. There is other ways of give you a bit more flexibility for creating channels. If you click on the add display item, because we often term, as I said in the previous video, we term a group as a display item. Then within the display item you get the segments, and then within the segments you get the channels. So here we've got add a display item. So if we just say it's a line of trees, so we just call it trees, we click on the add segment because we want to now add some segments. So it's asking you how many segments or how many trees you've got in your group. So if we said we've got 6 trees, and we're going to call them just a prefix of tree, and then we click add channels, which is asking you how many channels each segment is going to have. Normally you just only have one. If you've only got one set of lights on a particular tree, then you'd have one channel. So here it's asking you what colour you want on your segment. So to start with, we'll just click red. In fact, we'll go up and make these, let's call these red trees. And then at the bottom it's asking you number of channels per controller, which is saying 8, and the device. So if we change this to 2, because we've already got one up there that's 1, now it's created our red trees, and you see if we go and do on, we've got an option to turn them on red. If we've got trees that have got 2 colours on, like red and white, we can go and click add display item. We'll call these 2 colour trees. Add segments again. Again, we can have 6 segments. We can call them tree. And then this time, if we say we've got green and blue on those trees, we click OK, you'll see now that each tree has got the option of being turned on in green, or being turned on in blue, or being turned on in both colours. So it makes it very easy to turn colours on. If you just want to turn all the trees on in green, you can easily do that, or you can fade all trees down in blue. Makes it very quick to select colours and turn individual colours on. If we go and look at the configuration editor, you'll see in here that the 2 colour trees, so this segment has got, this display item has got the 6 segments, the 6 trees. And if we look at the first one, you'll see it has got 2 outputs on a controller associated with it. So the green is on controller 1, channel 1, and the blue is on controller 1, channel 2. You can go in and change these if that's actually on 3. you can edit these to what they actually are based on your real setup. And then you've got the same for all the other trees. As I showed you in the previous video, you can drill down through here, through the network, to see the actual configurations on the controller. Again, it's just a different way of viewing the data. You can either drill down by display item or by network and controller. So that's how you configure. You can rename items in here. So this one you can just double click and then it gives you so you can rename your controllers, rename your display items, and the same for the actual segments. You can rename these as you see fit to match your display. You can also delete segments and things in here. It's best to do this sort of thing in the configuration editor. You've got the option to delete segments. If you've forgotten to add a segment when you initially set up a display item, if you've got like 7 trees rather than 6, you can use this in here to add an additional segment to your group. And then there's the channels. You can add extra channels as well if you wanted an extra channels or an extra colour on one of your trees. You can add another channel on it. So that's giving you an overview of how you create a new show and add display items and segments to your show. If we look at a more of a real world example now, so if we just delete these groups, and if we look at a setup where we've got 2 controllers in this example, say these are both 8-channel controllers, such as the DC08, either the DIY or the plug and play ones. These are wired via a serial cable from the USB port via our USB RS485 cable from the computer to the first controller. So you've got the network coming out of the USB, going into the first controller, and then coming out of the first controller and going into the second controllers. As I said earlier, the controllers come prefixed with an ID of 1. You use the device manager to set that ID, so you can use the first controller straight out of the box. For the second controller, you'd have to hook that up to use the device manager to set the ID to 2. But we can look at that in another video. So here we've got 2 controllers. On the first controller, we've got 6 trees with white lights connected to it. So output 1 on the controller goes to the first tree, 2 to the second tree, so on. And then 7 and 8, we've got a star, which is a 2-colour star. 7 is connected to red, and yellow, and 8 is connected to some yellow lights. And then on the second controller, we've got a basic RGB strip, not a pixel strip. Well, again, we'll cover them in a different video. But it's a basic RGB strip where the whole strip can change colour. So you can get red, green, blue, yellow, and all the other sort of colours on the whole strip, not individual pixels, but the whole strip. So in these sorts of strips, you need 3 channels. So generally, the first channel you wire to the red LEDs, the second channel to the green LEDs, and the third channel to the blue. And we've got configuration that we'll go through that allows you to wire these and control these very easily from within the software. So if we quickly go through setting up the configuration for this mock display here. So first of all, if we go in and create these 6 trees, so like before, we'd go in and do add display item, and then we'd call it line of trees. and then we would add our 6 segments, each segment being a tree in this case, so we'd call it a tree. And then we'd want to add channels. Now this is going to be, this device ID here references the controller ID, so that's going to be left at 1, and the channel ID is the start ID. In this case, number 1 is the first tree. If the first tree was number 2, then you'd set that to number 2. So we're going to leave it set to 1 and 1, and we're going to put white lights on these trees. Leave the auto increment ticked, and then click OK. So that's given us our line of trees. If we quickly look in the configuration editor, you will see that it's created device ID 1 to 6, which is exactly what we've got in here. So next we want to create the star. So we're going to go and add another display item. You can, rather than use the buttons on the toolbar, you can right click and do add display item. You can use either way. So here we're going to create one called star. Add segments. This time we're going to have 2 segments on this because we're going to have 1 segment but 2 colours on this. So we're just going to call that star. And then in channels, we've got yellow and red. So we're going to select yellow and the red. The device ID is 1 still, because we're still talking about controller 1, but the first channel is going to be 7. So we're going to choose 7 and then click OK. And now that's created our star. And if we go into the configuration editor, we'll see we've got a star. Red is on channel 7 and yellow is on 8. So they're the right way around, so that's okay. So we've got 7 red and 8 yellow. So that's our first controller configured. If we can drill down this way, and you can see you've got all 8 channels, controller 1, and you got the 6 trees and the star in red and the star in yellow. So that's our first controller set up. Now to add the RGB, it's a similar process. We do add display item, then we'll just call this RGB strip. Add segments. We're going to have 1 segment on here, but we're going to have RGB red, RGB green, RGB blue, and that will create us our RGB strip. Now on the RGB strip channel, you can see when you do an on, you get any colour, so you can change it on in yellow because it's an RGB. You can choose any colour, so that's very easy just to turn lights on in any colour. So that's got our setup. We're going to go then and just save this. We'll save this as show 1, and there, that's all set up ready for us to start programming the show with. One thing to note is when you create another show, so if you obviously done this one to Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies, but if you then go and do another show, when you create your second show, let's just make it silent for this one, you can import that configuration. If you do import configuration and select your first show, it will then bring in all of your configuration. It's left the default Christmas tree there, but we can get rid of that. So that's brought in all your seconds. So you don't need to go through creating this configuration for every show. You create it once in your first show and then just add it in. So that's got your show all ready ready to go basically. We'll look at, in the next video, we'll look at creating the visualization for this and to start sequencing it.